a guy who appeared in late fall in a small northern town, generated a lot of interest and conversation among the local population. The man was about 6.5 feet tall and well built. He looked about 27 years old, well, maybe a year or two more. Such a rare tan on his skin in this latitude suggested that he was a native of the Sunshine State, or at least had lived in those parts for the past few years. The man was very taciturn. He gave the impression that he thought about things for a long time before he said a word. The young woman tried to play the ask and answer game, whether he was married, whether he had children, what kind of woman he liked, but he only smiled enigmatically. Jack, the newcomer's name, quickly found common ground only with the local forester, Anthony Gray. People just called him Tony. They walked through the woods together for hours, but the forester noticed that the guy did not want to talk about the past at all. Other than the fact that Jack was an orphan and lived in a southern state, he never learned anything. The forester, being a clever man who had lived for many years and seen a lot, decided that if he wanted to, he would tell his story himself. Mr. Gray did not pry and did not ask unnecessary questions. Soon they became such friends that Jack tried to relieve his elderly companion of his long walks in the forest and took them upon himself. Now they began to walk around the lands together, and Tony, when he got tired, returned, and the assistant continued his inspection. After just 1 year, no one considered Jack a newcomer or asked too many questions. He was a local to everyone, as if he had lived here all his life. The man was simply fascinated by the beauty of the local nature, the forests, and the amount of snow in winter. Every time he went on a tour of the area, he could not get enough of such beauty and wandered from early morning until sunset. Once, as Jack was on his way home from the store, he was attracted by the many-voiced barking of dogs. Turning the corner, he saw a scary picture. A pack of yard dogs surrounded a small gray fluffy ball and was ready to tear it to pieces. The puppy sat and squirmed in terror, whimpering pitifully. The eyes of the poor animal were filled with fright and tears. Jack picked up the first stake he could find and, swinging it at the malcontents, shouted, "Get out of here! Look, they found someone to molest! I'll get you now!" He threw the stick at the fleeing pack and, picking up a shaking baby dog, began to stroke his head. "Alright, calm down. Now come on, I'll feed you," said the man, and after showing the puppy behind the scenes, he headed home. From that day on, Troy, as Jack called his friend, began to live with his rescuer. In time, he transformed from a small, cowardly puppy into a huge dog ready to tear apart any beast. Troy was loyal and faithful to Jack and growled at anyone who could provide even the slightest threat to the man. They always went around the woods together now. Sometimes Troy, as if paving the way for his master, would run forward briskly, and when he returned, wagged his tail as if to let him know that there was no danger. The dog was very clever, just sensing a man or an animal before they appeared warned the owner. In these cases, he would stand in a certain posture of a hunter, ready to rush at his prey and snarl angrily in the direction that carried the danger. One day, when Jack and his faithful friend went out to check the forest, the dog took that very stand and started growling, then wagging his tail. He rushed into the thick of the forest, turning around from time to time. He let Jack know that he should follow him. When they had gone a fair distance and found nothing, the man decided that this time the sniff had failed the dog. But when they got almost to the middle of the wooded area, the man saw a small, private plane lying on its side. It was almost undamaged. As they circled around the flying vehicle, Jack saw smoke coming from under the plating, indicating a recent crash. Judging by the almost cooled down but slightly warm engine, the crash happened no more than 6, maybe 7 hours ago. The cabin door was ajar, and there was complete silence inside. Jack climbed into the plane. Boxes of food and medicine were on the floor. On a seat was a large bag of mail. All the letters and parcels were intended for the local mining mine. Looking into the cockpit, the man saw drops of blood, which may have indicated that whoever was driving the plane had been injured. A trail of red stains stretched right up to the exit. On the floor in the cabin lay a bloody woman's handkerchief. Perhaps they had tried to bandage the wounded man with it. He saw nothing else of note in the cabin, and as he was about to get out, he stumbled upon an inscription on the glass. The message was made with something black. "We are alive." Jack thought it was a woman's eyeliner or pencil. He ran his finger over the black trace, and in the light, saw that it was a cosmetic pencil. Jack didn't know how many people were flying in the plane. There was definitely a woman and one injured pilot after the crash. It was as if the inscription was calling for help, saying that people were alive and wanted to be found. Picking up the handkerchief, he held it up to Troy's nose and shouted, "Sick." He and the dog had never practiced this before, but clever Troy, immediately, as if he understood, sprinted into the woods. A few more minutes, and perhaps their help would no longer have been needed. After a couple of miles from the crash site, they emerged into a clearing where a pack of wolves surrounded the wounded pilot and the girl. The smell of blood enraged the animals, and they viciously stepped on the poor persons, trapping them in a ring. When Jack shot into the air, the girl turned around, and he thought it was a dream. He remembered well that little nose, the thin features of her face, and the girl's big eyes at that moment were filled with terror and seemed even bigger because of it. Troy, growling, began to advance on the wolf pack, and Jack, shooting again, finally scared them off, and the pack took off into the thick of the forest. The encounter with this girl seemed to take the man back many years. A young, handsome boy went off to serve in the army almost immediately after graduating from the orphanage. The tall, physically fit young man was assigned to the Navy. 3 years of service in the Navy passed very quickly, and on his return, Jack got a job as a security guard for a local millionaire. Sometimes Mr. Campbell, his boss, assigned him to accompany his daughter Alice on trips to boutiques and parties. The girl, despite the luxury in which she was brought up, was very simple and friendly. As luck would have it, they spent a lot of time together. Jack found it very easy with the girl. Soon, if someday they could not see each other, he caught himself thinking that he was waiting for their meetings. The young people talked for a long time, and after a while realized that they were in love and could not be without each other. Secretly from her stern father, they began to meet, and their relationships became romantic. As soon as the information reached Mr. Campbell, someone from the staff whispered in his ear. He went into a real frenzy. His daughter, a beauty, and some starving orphan. The father decided to take all measures to get the young people as far away from each other as possible. He came up with nothing better than to set the boy up, not thinking about the fact that he could ruin the young man's life, which had already been not that sweet. One day, the boss gathered all the servants together and said in menacing voice, "This has never happened in our house before. Some very rare and expensive jewelry was missing from the jewelry box in our bedroom. We had to go to the police, and during the search, the bag with the stolen items was found in the belongings of my guard." On the same day, thanks to his all-powerful connections and false statement, Jack was already sitting in a cell. They tried in every way possible to force him to confess to a non-existent crime. The case went to trial, but knowing that he was not guilty of anything, the guy continued to insist that he had not taken the jewelry. However, the judge, who had already received a certain amount of money, was just furious and could sentence the innocent young man to 4 years in prison. The ex-boss was rubbing his hands together, thinking he had broken up with the orphan boy once and for all. But no such luck. He hadn't considered that sometimes love makes babies. The relationship, it turned out, between the young man had already gone too far. Alice was pregnant with Jack's baby by that time, so she told her father about it. "Get rid of that baby immediately," shouted the indignant millionaire. "It is not enough still to beg at poverty. You're going to the hospital tomorrow." The daughter was shocked that her father could say such things about his future grandchild. It wasn't the child's fault his father was poor. Alice, being of legal age, decided to give birth by all means. In due time, a beautiful baby was born. The young mother was very happy that son was cast in the same mold as his daddy and named Jack after his beloved. She remembered her lover every minute and counted the days until his return. Alice believed that once released, he would definitely come to her hometown, and they will be together, no matter what obstacles. But it was not destined to happen. He never showed up on the release date. After serving the time allotted by the judge, Jack was sure that the millionaire had made some arrangements and married Alice off to the fiancé he'd chosen. Since no one else was waiting for the boy from the orphanage in a town by the sea, he decided to start life from the beginning and move away from the past. He had loved picture books since he was a child, where there were huge snow caps on the trees. The kids rolled down the slides, and people went sleigh riding around the villages. He decided that now he would not settle under the scorching sun of the south, but in a snowy regions, and so he found himself in the northern latitudes. But the young woman could not forget Jack, and not waiting for the return of her first and only love, decided to look for him herself. With the help of a detective agency, she found out that Andrew lives in a remote northern village with no wife or children. She received the exact address from the detective and decided to hear from her beloved reason for his recluse and tell him about his son. She left Jack Jr. to his grandmother without telling anyone where she was going. Alice, of course, understood that it was very far away, but she had no idea it was that far. There was not even a bus to the village where Jack now lived. The girl found out with effort about a small private plane that flew there once a week. It delivers food, medicine, and mail to the company's employees. Alice long and tearfully persuaded the pilot to take her with him, and she even had to tell the heart-wrenching story of their love and separation from Jack. The pilot gave in and put the girl on board. A storm overtook them during their flight, and the plane lost control and had to make an emergency landing. Now here in the forest, Jack and Alice stood in silence for a couple of minutes, as if they could not believe what was happening. Then they rushed to each other and stood embarrassed, afraid to unhook their arms. The pilot's moaning brought them back to reality. After having come to their senses, they bandaged the pilot, and Jack dragged the wounded man, bound with twigs, to the forester's house. Help was called to take the pilot to the hospital, and the cargo from the plane to the mine, where it was to be delivered. The whole evening the couple sat hanging by the fireplace, telling each other how they have lived all these years. Alice was glad that she now had two Jacks. She had already told her lover about her son. "I won't part with you for anything now. I'll take Jake Jr., and we'll all live together in this beauty. I think our boy will like it here very much." It was as if Alice foresighted something, because all these years she had tried to save something for her account while working for her father. By this time, she had enough money to buy a house. Of course, she could not buy a mansion with that money, but it was possible to buy a small house in these northern locations. And so they did, after Alice and her son moved in with Jack. Since that day, they had not parted and lived in a small house on the outskirts of the village. The faithful Troy now serves as a guard and babysitter for the young Jack.